Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating, multi-layered sociological mechanics behind modern marriage, separation, and divorce. We often think of divorce as a simple legal event, just signing a piece of paper. But the sociological data tells a much deeper, much more complex story about exactly how and why we come apart. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting the reality of divorce, factors behind the split, the process of uncoupling, the cost of coming apart, the impact on children, and finally, navigating the future. Let's jump right in. Section 1. The reality of divorce. We're moving beyond seeing it as a single event and looking at it as a complex societal shift. So, let's start by tackling the sheer scale of the whole thing. How much divorce is there really? We hear these sweeping statements about marriage ending all the time in the media, but getting an accurate measurement, it's surprisingly complex. Depending on how you crunch the numbers, you can tell very different stories. You've probably heard that old cliche that half of all marriages end in divorce. Well, if we look at the predictive data, the prevailing estimate today is actually that roughly 35 to 45% of all marriages entered into in a given year are likely to end in a split. It's a massive number, representing a persistent fact in modern life. But let's look at how sociologists actually arrive at these figures. And this perfectly shows why context is absolutely crucial when we look at data. You've got two common metrics. The Groot divorce rate looks at the entire population. We're talking kids, the elderly, unmarried folks, the whole shebang. That gives us 2.9 divorces per 1,000 people. But the refined rate, that focuses specifically on existing marriages. By calculating divorces per 1,000 married women, which comes out to 15.1, we get a way more useful metric for understanding the actual risk to a marriage. Legally speaking, a massive historical shift happened in the United States that changed these stats forever. Eventually, all 50 states adopted what we call no-fault divorce. Under this new system, couples no longer had to legally prove that one partner was to blame. No more accusations of adultery, cruelty, or desertion just to dissolve the marriage. It fundamentally changed how we exit marriages by totally removing the legal need to point fingers and assign guilt. So the key takeaway here is that divorce isn't just one single event. It's a multidimensional process known as the stations of divorce. It breaks down the reality that ending a marriage means emotional distancing, legal termination in court, splitting assets in an economic divorce, figuring out new co-parenting rules, completely reshaping your community and social circle, and finally, the psychic divorce of returning to an individual status. It's not just signing a paper, it's untangling an entire life. All right, Section 2, factors behind the split. Let's look at the demographics and stressors of modern marriage. Now, let's see how specific demographic factors play into those statistics we just talked about. What's absolutely fascinating here is how modern, everyday stressors directly correlate with the likelihood of a split. For example, simply working the night shift can actually bump up your chances of divorce. We also see clear correlations with education, where the highest rates are for women with some college but no bachelor's degree. On the flip side, high religious involvement is negatively associated with divorce. And demographic groups like Asian women and Hispanic men show the highest predictions for marriages lasting over 20 years. It really highlights how deeply our external circumstances seep into our internal relationships. But listen, if there's one incredibly consistent predictor of whether a marriage will last, it's age. Specifically, the age at which you get married. The data here is pretty stark. Nearly half of those who marry before turning 18 and 40% of those who marry before 20 eventually divorce. It's a huge reminder of how our stage in life completely impacts our long-term compatibility. Moving right along to Section 3, the process of uncoupling. This is all about how individuals gradually move apart. Zooming in even further, let's examine the actual psychological process of ending a marriage. Uncoupling is fascinating because it's largely hidden at first. It's this predictable process where one person, we call them the initiator, becomes dissatisfied. Basically, by the time a physical separation is announced to the world, the initiator has usually already been silently processing and mourning the end of the relationship for quite a while. The marriage is often over in their mind long before any bags are ever packed. Section 4. The cost of coming apart. The economic and non-economic aftermath. As couples navigate this uncoupling, we've got to look objectively at the real-world consequences that follow. The data reveals a pretty stark duality here. Economically, there's often a downward slide, particularly for divorced women who might face systemic impoverishment due to lost career seniority from raising a family and spotty child support. But emotionally, it's a huge divergence. While divorce can absolutely cause severe psychological distress and social isolation, it can also yield incredible positive growth, autonomy, and happiness for those escaping low-quality or highly conflicted marriages. Okay, Section 5, the impact on children, navigating the changing family structure. This brings us to what is probably the most heavily studied aspect of this whole explainer, the kids. Research shows that children generally go through 3 predictable stages of disruption. First up is the initial crisis, a highly stressful, unhappy time of conflict right after the separation. But fast forward about a year, and we see the transition phase, where those extreme emotional responses start to fade. Finally, we hit restabilization around year 5. This data is actually pretty reassuring, because it shows that the intense initial shock does eventually settle into a restabilized daily life. But wait, what about the long term? Well, the message from researchers actually varies a lot. Taking a look at the long-lasting consequences, researcher Judith Wallerstein presents a somewhat pessimistic view. Her data suggests that even at the 5-year mark, over a third of kids were still struggling in school and dealing with depression. This implies the distress of divorce really stays with a significant chunk of kids well into adulthood. On the totally opposite end of the spectrum, we have studies by Hetherington that highlight remarkable resilience. Her research found that 80% of children actually fared well and adapted within a few years, with over 75% even saying the divorce had been a good thing. It really underscores that getting out of a toxic, conflict-ridden home can often lead to a much healthier environment, and it highlights the incredible adaptability of families. Now, when we look at the legal realities of child custody after a divorce, there's still a massive traditional bias. Custody is awarded to the mother in about 80% of all cases. This heavily reflects old historical legal assumptions that women are just naturally better suited to care for kids, coupled with the reality that women usually request custody while men historically haven't. To handle all these parental responsibilities, the courts use a few different legal setups. We've got sole custody, joint legal custody, and joint physical custody. Interestingly enough, courts are usually very hesitant to award split custody. That's where the children are actually divided up between the divorcing parents. They tend to avoid this like the plague because of the harsh, disruptive effect it can have on sibling relationships. And finally, Section 6, navigating the future, legal and social responses to high divorce rates. Let's look at how society and the legal system are trying to manage the realities we've just uncovered. In an effort to reduce divorce rates, some states offer an alternative called a covenant marriage. This is basically a 2-tiered system where couples legally agree to mandatory premarital counseling, and they literally swear to divorce only under extraordinary circumstances. But, the sociological data points out a hard truth. Making divorce harder legally doesn't inherently make staying married any easier. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. If we can't completely eliminate divorce, how do we best structure our society to protect the families and children going through it? Instead of just focusing on the end of a marriage, maybe our focus should really be on how we support the new family forms, the single-parent households, the step-families, the binuclear families that emerge from the ashes. Thank you so much for diving into this data with me today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.